Now we are going to our main presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Swati Shah, who is the OneDukeGen study principal investigator. Dr. Shah is a cardiologist at Duke and is the Ursula Geller Distinguished Professor of Research in Cardiovascular Diseases, Associate Dean for Translational Research, and the Director of the Center for Precision Health. So welcome, Dr. Shah. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cecilia. And really, thank you all for joining our very first webinar. We're hoping to have many more of these. I'm really incredibly honored to serve as the principal investigator of this study. I've had a research passion in studying genetics here at Duke for over 25 years, which started way before we even knew how to look at people's DNA very well. So we've really been able to come really far and make a difference in patients' lives with what we've already learned. But as you'll see as I do my presentation, there's still so much more that we have to learn so that we can optimize how we use genetics and personalized information to take better care of patients. So thank you again for participating in the OneDukeGen study. And I will go to the next slide, please. So I'm a cardiologist, for those of you who don't know, and so I always like to tell stories of patients that I've seen. So I'm going to tell you two stories of patients that I have taken care of, both of which illustrate the importance of the work that we are doing in OneDukeGen and the importance of and gratitude that we have for your participation in this study. So the first patient was a 5-year-old male. He had a big gastrointestinal bleed, so basically started vomiting blood at 5 years old. He was admitted to Duke Hospital for 5 days. It took many months before he was given a diagnosis, and he was diagnosed with a rare form of hemophilia. For those of you who are not familiar with that term, hemophilia is a bleeding disorder that has a very strong genetic cause. His younger brother was screened, and he was also found to have the same rare genetic disorder. Next slide. Another patient I took care of was a 24-year-old patient. He presented with pretty non-specific, non-concerning symptoms to a different hospital, was having some heart palpitations, nothing too serious. He was a very avid athlete. He ended up undergoing a bunch of tests, including an echocardiogram or ultrasound of the heart and an EKG, which showed some mild thickening. He ended up getting genetic testing, and he was told that he had a very concerning change in his DNA and that he had a disease that was very rare and that could kill him if he kept playing sports. So he stopped playing sports for about 3 years and obviously was very concerned and stressed out about this. And after 3 years, he was told, this is after he saw us at Duke, it turns out that DNA change was not abnormal. That DNA change was actually benign, and he did not have this deadly disease that he had been told that he had. And really, this particular case highlights the importance of including people in research so that we can really understand genetic variation across all different types of people. Next slide. When I was still in training, Betsy Nabel, who was head of the National Institutes of Health, said the future of medicine will be predictive, preventive, preemptive, and personalized. What does that mean? What that fundamentally means is that the patient who is in front of me in my clinic, I treat as a unique patient. I may use information of how other patients are treated, but I should take their unique makeup into account. And we call this personalized medicine. And you might think, well, my doctor listens to me. It's a personalized. It's not just about the interaction with the patient, but about the data and the information that you get from the patient so that you can make sure that the patient is getting the right medicine, the right therapy at the right time, and most importantly, for trying to prevent disease. Next slide. So what does personalized medicine mean? I think this is a really exciting time in medicine. We're going to focus mostly on genetics, but I wanted to walk you through what it means to say, we're going to look at the patient right in front of me, and I'm going to use information about that patient. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but starting at the watch, which says 12 o'clock and is at 12 o'clock, these are digital health devices. Many of you probably wear Fitbits or other devices that give you information about your health. Well, doctors also want that information about your health so that we can take the best care of you. If you're going clockwise around, we can, this is an electronic health record. So we can use artificial intelligence to be able to pull information from your health records to make sure that we are providing you the best care. And you may say, well, my doctor knows everything about me, but we can't keep all that information in our heads. We really rely on computers to be able to optimize that. One example of that is to say, well, the computer can figure out there's some pattern in what's happening with the patient and be able to tell me as a doctor, hey, I know you weren't paying attention to these small increases in this, but this is really telling us that this person might have something bad, that's happening. Another thing we can do is we can actually model patients in cells. So we can take cells from a patient and put them in a petri dish, and then we can determine what the best drug for that patient is. So really incredible things that can be done with your cells to optimize how we take care of you. The next, going around the clockwise, those little green guys, those are the millions of friends that you carry around with you every day. And you're probably shaking your head and saying, what is she talking about? That's the microbiome. Those are all the bacteria that you carry inside your gut and on your skin, some of which are good and some of which are bad. And we know that there's a lot of interplay, some of it symbiotic, good ways, and some of it symbiotic in a bad way between the microbiome and your health. We know that exposure, so this guy, is having an environmental exposure. So being able to measure what are you exposed to as a patient outside of the clinic appointment. The ability to use apps. So your phones are very powerful mechanisms for you to get personalized care. I'm going to pause for a second to tell you about this particular app because I think it really shows how incredible a time it is in medicine right now. This app was actually developed by a mother who didn't have any computer background. And her son was diagnosed with retinoblastoma, which is a cancer of the eye. When her child was a baby, she was taking pictures of her baby, as I think all of us probably have thousands of pictures. And she kept going to the pediatrician and saying, one of his eyes looks a funny color. The reflection from the picture when I use a flash looks a funny color, looks a funny color. Nobody thought anything of it, first time mom. And eventually it turned out it was actually this cancer in the back of her son's eye, which then resulted in, her son losing his vision because they had to remove the eye. So this is a pretty incredible invention. It's an app that basically takes the pictures that you're already taking of your child and is able to tell if there are any early measures, early markers that might say that there's something bad going on in their eye. So our ability to really empower patients and individuals to take ownership of their own health through technology, I think that app is one of many that really, really has changed the way that patients are able to interact. This is a DNA double helix. We're going to talk a lot about genetics over the next few minutes and our ability to use genetics to identify undiagnosed syndromes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. And really the point of all this, like deep data, is so that we can have a more precise diagnosis, prognosis, and therapeutic decision-making for each individual patient, each individual person, bringing the right therapy to the right patient at the right time. Next slide. Okay, we're going to take a step back and we're going to spend a lot of the next 15 minutes on talking about genetics, which is, as my team knows very well, is one of my favorite things to talk about. You may say, well, I don't remember, middle school biology, so can you just remind me? The way that I like to explain it is genes are like recipes. Some people call genes a blueprint. So this recipe, is how your cake gets baked. Now, your cake could get baked slightly differently each time. It depends on how well you follow the recipe. It depends on whether you have flour available or what kind of flour you have available. But the recipe book provides that blueprint for how the cake gets made. In that same way, your DNA, these are billions of letters that live in almost every one of your cells. The DNA is a recipe book for determining your proteins. And the proteins are what make up your cells. The proteins are what determine health and disease. So DNA alone isn't enough, to explain everything about who you are. And it really is this complex interplay, but the DNA serves as a basic recipe book to make you who you are. Next slide. Okay, well, Spotty, that's all fine and good, but what do genes have to do for our health? Well, what if you took a recipe book and you had one word spelled wrong or you misread one word? So in this particular example, the person has posted on this recipe, sorry, but I tried it and it was awful. The recipe was dry and the flavor, even if it wasn't dry, was not that good. A lot of the flavor issue could have been attributable to the sausage I chose. I used Italian sausage, but I didn't vary anything else from the recipe. And the response from the person who wrote the recipe is, it calls for sage, not sausage. So they had misread the recipe. So even those 3 letters was enough to cause a big problem with that recipe. In the same way with your DNA, 1 letter change across those billions of letters that you have is enough to cause you to be more susceptible to disease. And that's where we're going to spend a little bit more time talking to. And that's why your genes are important for your health. It's not everything. You should still keep leading a healthy lifestyle, but your genes do help determine what diseases you may be susceptible to. Next slide. I always like to say genetic diseases are hidden in plain sight. I'm going to give you a little bit more data about what that means. What do you mean genetic diseases are hidden in plain sight? But I thought this was a fun little cartoon. I will tell you, 3 out of 4 of us in my family last night failed this image test. I'm going to pause for a second. Can anybody find there's a cat in this picture? Okay, don't feel bad if you didn't see the cat. None, 3 out of 4 of us in my family did not. Next slide. There's a cat right there. It's stretched out. I don't know if you can tell on the Zoom, but it's stretched out and its head is on the right side of the screen, tail towards the left. Now that you see it, you can't unsee it. Genetic diseases are like that. They are unfortunately hidden in plain sight. We underdiagnose these diseases significantly. And it's one of the reasons we're doing OneDukeGen. When I talk to doctors, I will ask them, have any of you diagnosed a rare genetic disease? And usually very few hands in the audience will go up. It's not because those diseases aren't there. It's because we're not seeing them. Next slide. And we consider these genetic diseases rare. I told you about 2 patients that I've taken care of, both of whom had rare diseases. The young boy who had a rare bleeding disorder, and then the young man who thought he had a rare cardiac disorder. But rare diseases are not that rare. If you look at all rare diseases together, about 1 in 40 people have a rare genetic disease. So I don't know how many people, we've got hundreds of people on the webinar right now. So take 1 in 40, people will have a genetic disease. However, these are highly underdiagnosed. I'm going to give you one example of work. I'm a cardiologist, so this is work that we've done in the cardiovascular space. This is an ultrasound of a heart, and we call this an echocardiogram. I read these also as part of my cardiology work. And without teaching you how to read an echo, I'll just tell you this heart is not moving as well as it should. This is called a cardiomyopathy. The heart muscle is weak. We did a study of 10,000 patients. that were undergoing invasive procedures. So they had their doctors had some kind of concern that they had cardiovascular disease, and they were undergoing an invasive cardiac procedure. So they'd already been to multiple doctor's appointments before they end up at this invasive cardiac procedure. And we did genetic sequencing on all 10,000 people. And we found that 2% had a rare cardiovascular, just when we focused on cardiology, a rare cardiovascular genetic disease. So 2% not only carried an abnormal letter change. Remember, I told you the recipe, if the letter's one letter wrong, they carried one of these rare abnormal letter changes, but also had evidence of the disease. So they were already showing signs and symptoms of the disease. But despite this, despite the fact that they already had evidence of the disease, whether it's echocardiogram or based on their symptoms, only 1/3 had been diagnosed. So 2/3 of those patients did not have a diagnosis even after 10 years. And again, this is one of our motivations for doing OneDukeGen, because we believe strongly that in a careful way, we do need to empower research participants, patients with this information so that they can be armed, to take action to help promote health. Many of these diseases are actually preventable if they're diagnosed early or if the risk is identified early. Next slide. Okay, and I'm going to tell you 3 quick stories of how genetics has transformed medicine. You may say, okay, well, that's great that you want to do this, but how has it really helped us? I'm going to give you three quick stories of how genetics has really transformed how we take care of patients. Still lots of work to be done. This is a really touching story. The first time I heard this story, I was in tears. This is the first child that was saved by DNA sequencing. This young boy was, I think he was 1 year old when he started having a lot of problems with his gastrointestinal tract, with his colon. He started forming fistulas, which are abnormal connections between his skin and his colon. So he basically was creating tracts from his colon out to his skin. By the time he was 3 years old, he had had hundreds of surgeries, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with him. All the testing had come back negative for what was going on with him. Now, this is many years ago, and DNA sequencing, where we can look at the, your entire genome, all your DNA, had just started coming up on the research side. So this is not work that we did here at Duke, but his doctors started working with researchers and decided to do genetic sequencing on him. And when they did genetic sequencing on him, they found one letter change out of all those billions of letters, one letter change that only existed in him and didn't exist in anybody else in the world. That letter change was in a disease, not his disease, a different disease. And that different disease is treated by doing a bone marrow transplant. But he didn't have that disease. But they were desperate. This child was about to die. So they decided to take some extreme work, and they ended up doing a bone marrow biopsy on him, a bone marrow transplant on him, even though he didn't have that same disease, but he had that same rare genetic mutation. And in his case, his particular mutation had never been seen before. He is now 12 years old, 12 or 13 years old, and thriving, and has no more fistulas and no more tracts. So this is a pretty incredible story of how DNA sequencing, saved this first child. We are now applying this, and when I say we, this is across the country, in babies and infants who are critically ill. So people who are in the babies and children who are in the pediatric intensive care unit, the neonatal intensive care unit, where if you do whole genome sequencing in these babies that you don't know what's wrong with them, we know they're really sick and the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with them. If you do whole genome sequencing, look at all their DNA, 30% of the time you can figure out the diagnosis, even though the doctors couldn't have figured out the diagnosis, just by looking for these usually it's just a single letter change in the DNA. Next slide. Second story, I love telling this story because it has really affected millions of patients' lives. And this is the story of a drug that's called PCSK9 inhibitors. These are drugs that treat people who have very, very high cholesterol. Repatha is one of them. There's several on the market. Dr. Helen Hobbs had a very interesting idea. She said, instead of studying people who have severe disease, why don't we study people who are very, very healthy? So she actually looked at families. This is a pedigree from some of the families. She looked at families that had very low cholesterol. These are people who have cholesterols of 10, for example. Why do these families, or something hereditary going on in these families, that all of them have low cholesterol? And by looking at these families and doing genetics in these families with low cholesterol, she discovered a gene that if patients had a mutation, a letter change in this gene, that caused them to have low cholesterols. That led to the development of these drugs, which basically mimic a genetic mutation. They don't modify your genes, but they mimic as if you had a mutation within this particular gene that's called PCSK9. And this discovery in looking at families, so these are families who agreed to participate in research. This is a smaller study than OneDukeGen. This is the Dallas Heart Study that Dr. Hobbs looked at, led to a transformative medicine that is preventing heart disease in millions of people. Next slide. And then the last story I'm going to tell is just more for interest. So I suspect all of you, if most of you, maybe not, but I'd maybe say all of you, because I didn't know some of this. You all think that the DNA that you're born with is the DNA that you die with, right? Your DNA stays the same. Everybody knows that, right? It's like a fingerprint. Well, it turns out that's not true. So these are twin astronauts, identical twins. So when they were born, their DNA was exactly the same, right? They're identical twins. They're both astronauts. One of them ended up going into space, and one of them did not go into space. And when you go into space, you get, bombarded with solar radiation and all kinds of kind of toxic stuff. So when the brother who went into space came back down and they analyzed both of their DNA, they found that the brother who had gone to space actually had different DNA than his brother who had stayed on this earth. And so this has really led to incredible work over the past 5 to 6 years where we can now model these changes that happen in your DNA. And these changes in your DNA that you were not born with, they accumulated over the course of your life, usually not because you're going into space, but for other reasons. Those mutations can increase your risk of heart disease. So a really interesting story just in the past 5, 6 years that has also really changed the way that we take care of patients and try to prevent heart disease. So with that, next slide. We really need to take all of this to the patient, and that's another thing that we are trying to do with OneDukeGen. It's not just about giving genetic test results back, doing genetic discovery, but working with our health system to make sure that we're developing the systems of care to be able to bring all this back to the patient. Next slide. Okay, and to finish up, what's the best genetic test? Next slide. Know your family history. Even though I order a lot of expensive genetic testing and we're doing genetics here in the OneDukeGen, what I can tell you, the takeaway from this is know your family history. The family history tells you a lot. I know it's hard sometimes because, Aunt Gertrude may not know, what Uncle, Phil died of. But take some time and figure out what diseases in your family run in your family and make sure you're communicating that family history to your healthcare providers. Next slide. Okay, so to finish up, I wanted to give you a little bit of follow-up about the young boy, the very first patient case that I told you about, the young boy and his brother who had this rare genetic bleeding disorder, in case you were wondering how they are doing. Next slide. They're doing great. These are my best 2 genetic experiments. So that was actually my son who was in the hospital for 5 days and then had a many-month, what we call diagnostic odyssey, where his mother, meaning me, went through a lot of stress in trying to get a diagnosis for him. And then that's his little brother who also has this rare genetic disorder. And knock on wood, they're both thriving and doing great. But it has revitalized my passion for trying to bring genetics to patients, to health systems, and trying to prevent disease. So thank you all again for participating in this webinar and for participating in the OneDukeGen study. And with that, I will turn it back over to Cecilia.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. That was beautiful, beautiful. And now you have teenagers, right? That's beautiful. Thank you so much for your great presentation as always. So I just wanted to share a little bit about us, in the community and what we are doing for community engagement and to have you engage and inform. So this is the first webinar that we are hosting, and there will be many more to come. Because for you, it's important to be engaged, and you are the center of what we do. We value your participation. We value that you are contributing with us to improve the health for future generations. So, as you can see, we have here, in our webpage, you will find many educational videos that can tell you about genetics, about return of results, about privacy. I invite you to watch them. You will find them in the study webpage. We try our best to make them as clear as possible so you can be having a good time and learning about the work we are doing. You see us there in the other picture, us in the community. That is me in the middle, a couple years younger, but still doing the same work. We love to be immersed in our community because our participants, are our neighbors. We go to the same park, we go to the same events, so you will very easily, meet us there on the ground. Something important for our study is to represent each of our participants, and we have an amazing community advisory council. We are very grateful for that. Our community advisory council is composed of community members who provide important input and perspective on our project. These community members share their expertise and their time, and they represent you, our participants, and they help us identify community priorities, needs, and interests. And they serve as study ambassadors within the community. And this is also what we ask from you, that you help us spread the word and tell everybody about the amazing job that Duke is doing for research. Now it's time for our Q&A. I will invite my coworker, my colleague, Brooke, who is the project leader of our study, and she's going to help us with the chat. Hi, Brooke there.
Hello, Cecilia.
Hi.
Thank you.
And Brooke, I can see the questions too, so I'm happy to take on some of the ones that are already there, and then you can assist down the line.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you all for putting your questions in. These are actually really, really fantastic questions. Maybe I'll start with one that I think sometimes comes up, and which is how secure is your study funded in light of the current environment? We are fortunate that our study does not currently receive funding from the federal government. We do not receive funding from the National Institutes of Health. So we are currently stable and doing well and continuing our enrollment. And you saw some of the wonderful enrollment numbers, as Cecilia pointed out. I will also say, though, we do depend on all different kinds of funding, including federal funding, for us to actually get the research done from the study. So we're continuing to work hard to make sure that we have a very full portfolio of different funding options. But we appreciate everybody caring about us and recognizing the importance of science. There's also a question, I think several of you might have this question, is when can I expect to receive genetic test results? I know many of you, that was certainly the icing on the cake for participating in this research study, is the ability to learn something about your own health. That's a tough question. We can't make guarantees. This is a research study. We're not doing this clinically, so we can't turn these results around immediately. We're still in the process of doing the genetic sequencing, and then there's lots of work that goes into analyzing those data, making sure that anything that we do return to you is accurate, and we go through multiple steps to make sure that that is accurate, make sure we're creating a report that is understandable to you, and then building our genetic counseling team to make sure that we're returning those results in a way that is informative to you. I also want to remind you that most of you will never receive a result. Because most of you won't have anything that we can find in the research study that is abnormal. It's really important to note that just because you don't hear from us doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to, have conversations with your healthcare provider about your own health. And that's where that family history is something relatively simple that most of you can do and have that conversation with your healthcare provider, even while you're waiting for the research results from OneDukeGen. Brooke, maybe if you have another question that's top of your list, otherwise I can kind of go down the list of what I can see in the box.
Sure. We did have a question asking if we're familiar with the All of Us study and if we are accessing or using their data.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. My research laboratory uses a lot of these other databases that exist. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with some of these studies, All of Us is very similar to OneDukeGen in that they're collecting health information, getting samples, blood or saliva samples from their participants, and then returning genetic test results. All of Us is being done all across the country, so that's what the All of Us means. And the difference in the focus is that All of Us is, looking at people who may not even have evidence of disease, who, including healthy people, whereas our focus has been on key diseases. It doesn't mean that you have the disease, but you may have gotten a heart image, or you may have gotten something that gives us information to be able to link to your DNA. We do use the All of Us study, as well as some other similar studies that have been done, like UK Biobank, which is a population-based genetic study in the United Kingdom. We use that to help augment the work that we're doing within OneDukeGen. All of Us does have, as we do, very strict protocols and training that you have to go through before you can actually be able to analyze those data. But thank you for that question. We are absolutely leveraging everything around us in making sure that we're doing the best science possible.
Brooke, before you continue, just a reminder that if participants have any question, to put those in the Q&A section, right out there, please.
Here's another interesting question. How does the OneDukeGen study assist, if at all, in understanding how an individual's DNA might change over time? So that's a great question. I think whenever I present that astronaut example, people are always curious about what their own development of changes in DNA might look like. For right now, that work is research. So the genetic test results that we will be returning to you are ones that over many years, lots of geneticists and scientists across the world have agreed that those are things that we should be returning and are responsible to return because we can do something about what we find. This change in the DNA that we saw with the astronaut is still a research finding. However, we are going to be looking at that particular thing. It's called clonal hematopoiesis of indeterminate potential, or CHIP. We're going to be looking at that as a research project within OneDukeGen. So over the next few years, if that particular aspect of genetics becomes something that's used clinically, meaning we show that it can be used to help inform patient care, there is always a chance in the future that that could be something that we would return to you. But for now, it's purely in the research realm. and we'll be studying it, but we won't be returning it to you.
I do see a couple of questions in here that are related to AI and how that might be used with our study or involved in our study.
Yeah, well, we use AI all the time, including for this webinar, but let AI is in real time affecting how we take care of patients and mostly in a good way, and it is absolutely affecting our research. Let me give you two examples of research that we are doing, which involves OneDukeGen, that is in the AI realm, just so I can be more specific. One thing that we're doing is using AI to help determine which of those letter changes in your recipe is important and which isn't. So I take care of patients who have genetic disorders and we order genetic testing, but there's billions of letters in your DNA. And sometimes, in fact, frequently, we find a letter change that's different than many people in this world, but we don't know if it actually causes disease or not. We call these variants of uncertain significance. We have developed an AI model which helps us take those variants where we don't know if it causes disease or not and helps us better stratify those variants to say, yes, these are high risk, or no, these are low risk. So that's one example of how AI has already helped us in a way that would have taken years and years of research in the past. A second way that we're using AI in OneDukeGen is using imaging. What do I mean by that? So I'm a cardiologist, and this is in the cardiovascular space. Many of you have, or some of you have had echocardiograms, which is an ultrasound of your heart. We read these echocardiograms, and I'll tell you, as a human being looking at that many images, right? You can get very fatigued and you can miss things. We're using AI to build a model, and we've got a pretty good model so far that we're deploying on these echocardiograms and using it to identify patients who have undiagnosed genetic diseases, and in this particular case, genetic cardiovascular diseases. And that particular aspect of OneDukeGen is currently funded by the National Institutes of Health. And over the next few years, we would then take that model and deploy it within our patient echocardiograms within the Duke Health System to be able to help patients and identify a disease that they didn't even know that they had, in this case, using imaging paired with the genetics. So I'd say AI is not linear in how we're using it in medicine and science. It's very much exponentiating. I'll put the caveat on that we have to do it carefully. We have to do it ethically. We have to understand the societal and legal implications of AI that we do. And Duke happens to be a leader in that space. Not me, but many people at Duke, including one of our vice deans, who are national leaders in responsible use of AI in how we take care of patients. So you can't just take any of these AI models and just deploy them on our patient data. It has to be done responsibly. It has to be, we have to make sure that the algorithms have been developed correctly, and we have to make sure they're being deployed responsibly and ethically. So great question.
Hmm. And let's see. We
Maybe
have
we'll go to,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. No, you go ahead.
There was a question related to some of the stories regarding familial cardiomyopathy and how you can research changes that happen between families to learn more about the disease and help with diagnosing individuals in the future.
Yeah, good question. Familial cardiomyopathy, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, this means, so that echocardiogram image that I showed you, where I said that the heart muscle wasn't beating normally, that is called cardiomyopathy. Cardio means heart, myo means muscle, path means something's wrong. So something wrong with the heart muscle is what cardiomyopathy means. When we see patients with cardiomyopathy, here in the hospital or in the clinic, the the first thing we do is to say, are there blockages in the arteries around the heart? Of the people that are left that don't have a blockage in the artery around the heart, those cardiomyopathies, about half of them are familial, meaning there's a genetic cause. Unfortunately, even in the ones that we know cluster in families, as I think the participant was saying, even when we know that this cardiomyopathy is clustering in families, our current clinical genetic testing can only identify the abnormal letter change half the time. So it really highlights, even though we've been doing this kind of research for 20 years, that there's still a lot more work to be done. And actually, it's one of the research projects that we'll be doing in OneDukeGen is to try to identify new genes that cause familial cardiomyopathy, which unfortunately is increasing in prevalence, but it's not because the disease is increasing. It's because we're finally starting to take good family histories and realize that some of this disease is clustering in families. There was an interesting question. When does genetic sequencing become mandatory? Who has access to the results? Does it include insurance companies? This is a really good question. So when I see patients in my clinic, I do not see patients in my clinic alone. I always have a genetic counselor with me. Genetic counselors are individuals who undergo several years of training after undergraduate, after college, where they are trained in how to deliver genetic test results. But even more importantly than giving the genetic test results, they talk to patients and families before we even order any of the testing to make sure that the patient understands what the implications of that genetic testing are. Genetic sequencing is, over the past 20 years, it has become more and more covered by insurance companies. So where 10 years ago, so I started our cardiovascular genetics clinic at Duke about 15 years ago. And 15 years ago, the cost of the genetic sequencing was very much a barrier to me being able to provide genetic sequencing to very many patients. Now, insurance companies are much better about covering genetic sequencing, and there are actually genetic sequencing companies that will offer clinical testing. So that's different than research testing, offer clinical testing for heavily discounted prices, even if your insurance company won't cover that. So what I would say in response to that question is, your primary care provider, or if you have a cardiologist or oncologist, they're the first point of conversation. If you think that you may have a need or a reason to have genetic sequencing done, to have that conversation with them. We are currently not, for patient care, we are not sequencing all the billions of your letters. We don't know what to do with all that information on the clinical side. So when you have clinical testing done by your healthcare provider, that is focused on a small set of genes that may be related to some risk that you have, which may be from your family history or because you already are having some signs and symptoms.
Sunny, I see a question here about somebody wanting to know if any results or data from a study will show up in their medical chart.
You are in control of your genetic test results from this study. There will be an opportunity down the road where if you want us to, we potentially, I'm going to put a lot of caveats in there. You could potentially allow us to share this in your medical record, but it will always be your decision about whether you want that done or not. You will get your research results directly to you and not through your medical record. And we will be having, we have a team of genetic counselors as part of OneDukeGen that will be returning these results, meaning it's not just about getting the written report, but actually having a conversation with a real human being, a real genetic counselor who can explain this stuff. This is really complicated stuff. I mean, most doctors don't get this training, during medical school. It's really hard to understand. So as part of that conversation with the genetic counselors, there may be an opportunity down the road for you to put that in your medical record, but that is your decision. Otherwise, it's your information for you to do what you would like to do with. So it is protected in that sense. There was another related, I think somewhat related question. Would the DNA changes we go throughout our lives have any impact on criminal investigations involving DNA-based evidence? There is certainly a precedent for this in other, direct-to-consumer testing companies where that has happened. Brooke, you may want to comment about our certificate of confidentiality and how your results are protected as part of OneDukeGen, so that will not be an issue for your participation in OneDukeGen. And maybe, Brooke, you could provide a little bit more information about our certificate of confidentiality.
Certainly. So our certificate of confidentiality covers both your genetic sequencing data and also the samples if you provided a blood sample that we have stored in our biobank for future research use. And what this means is that we cannot be subpoenaed by anyone to provide information that might identify you. So if any kind of, federal or state government agency approaches us, we say we have this certificate and we do not have to share the information. There are certain cases where we would have to, but it's usually very specific cases, like if we are aware of a person who may be about to harm themselves or others. But in general, it covers us and you so that you won't, it won't be a situation where somehow, people get their hands on your data without you knowing.
Thank you, Brooke. That gave me a minute to be able to look through some of these questions. And Brooke, it might be useful. There were several questions that people said that they were already registered or enrolled in the study, but hadn't yet, to their recollection anyway, given a sample. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I'm suspecting that most of our participants here who are asking that question probably came through one of the on-site clinics where my staff are enrolling patients. And I'm also guessing that you self-consented, which is wonderful. We do occasionally miss people who come through that are self-consented, and we do our best to reach everyone, but we have, a limited number of staff and we can only be in one place at a time. And sometimes appointments get changed or, a variety of things can happen. In these cases, we try to keep an eye out to see if you come back into the clinic. But if not, we are starting up the ability to reach out to you and send a saliva collection kit to your home. This is what some other participants do in the study already. But we are working on a way to, we are almost finished our workflow to be able to send these out to people that we did not get to see, but who have already signed up for the study. So you should be hearing from us fairly soon, I would say probably next month sometime.
Thank you, Brooke. And that reminds me that it might be useful, although I'm not good with technology, so maybe my team can help. It might be useful to include the web link to our website for OneDukeGen, which gives you more information about the study, because there were some questions also about people who are not currently enrolled in the study. Perhaps they're watching this webinar with somebody who is enrolled and we're curious about how they could participate. And I think that website has a lot of good information and FAQs for not only for people who might be interested, but even for people who are already enrolled. So team, if you can figure out a way to share that so that the participants can see that web link, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, and we have time, Dr. Shah, for one more question.
Okay, great. There's a lot of questions and we apologize that we can't get to all of them. I'm seeing some really interesting ones. Maybe I'll end with, on a positive note, the question is, you currently have 10,000 participants. How many more do you want to include? If we can keep all this hard work and funding going, our ultimate goal is to have 150,000 participants in OneDukeGen within the next 6 to 10 years. I'm going to give huge kudos to my team led by Brooke, who this is a Herculean effort to collect this many research participants and samples in such a short period of time. So I'm very confident that we are well on our way to being able to get to our goal of 150,000 individuals. With that, Cecilia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Shah. As always, your presentation was wonderful. We thank you for your leadership. And we can see by, just by listening to you, all the love you have for the research you do. So we are very thankful for that. Very thankful for, for your knowledge, your time. Thank you. And to you all, our participants, as I said before, we cannot do the work we do without you. So we are so grateful for your participation. We sent you already our first newsletter, and we are planning on sending another one this year. So please enjoy it. Ask questions about it. We ask you always to keep your information updated. That is very important for the study. And if you have any question or comment, or there is something that we couldn't answer today, we ask you that please you send us an email at the address that is there in the screen. That is OneDukeGen@duke.edu. With this, we conclude our presentation today. Yes, Dr. Shah.
Sorry,
You want to say
Cecilia.
some words. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Mickey, we put the chat can't be seen by the participants. So just Google or use whatever your web search. If you type in OneDukeGen, all one word, OneDukeGen is written here. It's the very first link that comes up. So apologies that I'm not able to actually send you the link.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. So, well, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and let's please keep in touch. Thank you. Have a great night.